Anthony, Kansas is a small town to the southwest of Wichita that is near the Kansas-Oklahoma border. It is also the birthplace of Robert Knight, seen to the left in this 2011 photograph from the Topeka Capital Journal. Bob was born November 4th, 1924, and attended high school in Anthony. He graduated in 1942 and was setting out to get his degree at Kansas State. His country and the world, however, had other plans. He got his draft notice and was told to report for duty. All across the state, other Kansans like Knight were answering the call of duty to fight Germany, Italy, and Japan in the Second World War, including one General Dwight David Eisenhower of Abilene, who coordinated the successful landing of Allied troops in France on June 6, 1944. From there, the Allies pushed and forced the Germans back to their own borders along a formidable defensive line known as the Siegfried Line. The Siegfried Line was a 390-mile line stretching from the Netherlands to the borders of Switzerland. It had a total of 18,000 bunkers, tunnels, and tank traps, and this is where we find Private First Class Bob Knight, now deployed in Europe, on November 16, 1944. Knight was now a member of 2nd Platoon I Company, 334th Regiment, 84th Infantry Division. Nicknamed the Rail Splitters, the job of the 84th was to break through the line near the city of Aachen. Knight was about to face his first combat, and they advanced forward just as they were taught back in training. Then they came under fire, and the soldier next to Knight was killed. Knight was officially in the war zone. After much fighting in the area around the Roar River, Knight's unit was taken off the line and relieved. They were loaded on trucks and were on the way to Belgium. The troops were under the belief that they were being sent there for time away from the heavy fighting. Usually in these long trips from one area to another, there would be frequent stops for soldiers to relieve themselves. Knight noticed they weren't doing it this time. The troops on the truck had no clue where the Germans were, and neither did their commanding officers. They didn't know how far the Germans had advanced into Belgium. When they offloaded in the town of Marseille, Belgium, they did learn the Germans had taken their kitchen truck, and that the Germans had the road. Their commanding officer went to a meeting and came back. He informed the troops that the Germans had broken through American lines, and that they didn't know where they were, or where the Germans were coming from. They only knew they were to defend the town at all costs. At this point in the war, Adolf Hitler had decided that he was going to gamble and send an all-out offensive at the Americans stationed in Belgium. Known as the Battle of the Bulge, it was fought in the winter of 1944 through 1945. Horrible conditions were experienced by the troops, as temperatures would drop to negatives on a daily basis. Trench foot and frostbite were a common occurrence among the troops. Knight had started the battle as a private first class, but by the end, due to losses, he was a staff sergeant squad leader. One day during their defense of Marseille, German tanks came out of the woods and chased his squad out of their foxholes. Their line was thinly spread out and his squad didn't have anti-tank weapons, so their best bet was to run. They went and hid in a barn. After a while, several soldiers volunteered to scout the situation. They were never heard from again. Early on in the battle, the Allies couldn't use their air superiority over the Germans, because the weather was too bad. Once the weather cleared up, Knight could see B-17 bombers flying overhead, and bombing German targets, which included tanks like the ones that overran his position earlier. A few days of holding the line with air support, Knight and the other Americans counterattacked. When Knight's outfit from the north met up with General George S. Patton's army from the south, Knight's involvement in the Battle of the Bulge was over. His unit was sent back down to the Roar. Knight's battalion led the way across the Roar, but on March 2, 1945, the tank Knight was using for cover was hit, and he was wounded. He was sent to a hospital and was released. He was given a 3-day pass to Paris before he could return to his unit. He was there when Germany surrendered on VE Day. He remembers the Parisians celebrating and turning on all of the lights at nighttime for the first time since the early days of the war. For his service in the war, Knight was awarded a Purple Heart, a Presidential Unit Citation, an ETO ribbon with 3 stars, and also a Combat Infantry Badge. After the war, Knight went back to K-State and graduated in architecture and got a job in Topeka where he started working in 1950. He settled down, got married, and had 3 children. He retired in 1987 and lives in Topeka today.